Leo felt the weight of the restaurant pressing down on him. It was a physical thing, a smothering blanket woven from the clinking of crystal, the low hum of self-important conversations, and the suffocating scent of money he did not possess. Each gilded chair and starched white tablecloth was a testament to a world he only visited as a guest, a +1 on the arm of his wife, Isabella. She, on the other hand, wore the opulence like a second skin. Her dress, a slash of crimson silk, seemed to absorb the light of the chandeliers, making her the undeniable center of their small, cold universe. She gestured with a wine glass, her fingers adorned with rings that cost more than Leo's car, a car she frequently mocked. "You see, Marco," she said, her voice a carefully pitched instrument of casual cruelty, aimed at her brother but intended for Leo. "It's about standards. One must maintain them, or one becomes insignificant." Her eyes, cold and calculating, flickered toward Leo for a fraction of a second. Marco, a softer, less refined copy of his sister, nodded eagerly. He was a man who lived in Isabella's shadow, basking in the reflected glory of the wealth she had married into, or rather, the wealth she had so expertly managed to control. He saw Leo not as a brother-in-law, but as a piece of furniture that had come with the house, one that was becoming increasingly worn and unfashionable. The dinner was a celebration of a new acquisition for Valenti Enterprises, the company Isabella ran with an iron fist. It was her family's company, but she was the one who had, through sheer ruthlessness, elevated it. Leo had a minor, vaguely defined role there, a title without authority, a position granted out of a sense of what she called wifely obligation. It was a gilded cage designed to keep him compliant and close at hand. "Leo, do try to keep up," Isabella sighed, noticing his silence. "Marco was just explaining the genius of the leverage model we used. It's complex, I know. Don't trouble your sweet, simple head with it." The condescension was so familiar it was almost comforting, like the ache of an old injury. Leo simply nodded, his gaze dropping to the intricate pattern on his porcelain plate. He had learned long ago that engaging was a losing battle. Her words were weapons, and he had no armor. He had once been a man of simple ambitions, a mechanic, and a good one. He loved the logic of engines, the satisfaction of bringing something broken back to life with his own two hands. He had his own small garage, a loyal clientele, and a sense of peace. Then he met Isabella. She had been like a supernova, brilliant and dazzling, and he, a quiet planet, had been pulled into her orbit, losing himself completely. She had found his profession quaint at first, then embarrassing. The grease under his fingernails, the smell of oil on his clothes, it all clashed with the pristine, fragrant world she wanted to build. So he sold the garage. For her, he took the desk job. For her, he became this silent, hollowed-out version of himself. For her. "Honestly," Isabella continued, her voice rising just enough to draw the attention of the neighboring tables, "sometimes I wonder what you even do all day, darling. The company would run itself without your input." Marco snickered into his napkin. The public nature of the humiliation was the point. It was a performance. She was reasserting her dominance, reminding him and anyone who cared to watch of his place. Leo's jaw tightened. He felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, a dull, impotent anger that he had learned to swallow down like poison. He picked up his water glass, the condensation cold against his trembling fingers. It was then that she delivered the final, devastating blow. She leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in her merciless eyes, and lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that felt louder than a shout. "Let's be perfectly honest, Leo," she said, the smile on her lips a cruel slash. "You're nothing without me." Absolutely nothing. If I left you tomorrow, you wouldn't have a penny to your name or a roof over your head. You would be back in some greasy garage, forgotten. Remember that." The words struck him with physical force. Nothing. He was nothing. All the years of sacrifice, of swallowing his pride, of trying to be the man she wanted, and this was his value. Zero. The air in his lungs seemed to turn to ice. The ambient noise of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. He just sat there, shattered. He could feel the pitying glances from the next table. He was a spectacle, a man being vivisected by his own wife's contempt. Marco looked away, a flicker of something, shame perhaps, or just discomfort, crossing his face before he schooled it back into smug indifference. A waiter, a young woman with kind, observant eyes, had been hovering nearby, waiting to clear their appetizer plates. She had heard it. Leo saw the flash of empathy in her expression before she quickly masked it with professional neutrality. As she reached for his plate, her movement was swift and discreet. Her fingers brushed his, and he felt a small, folded piece of paper being pressed into his palm. It was so subtle, so expertly done, that neither Isabella nor Marco noticed a thing. They were too absorbed in their mutual triumph. Leo's fingers closed around the note, the crisp edges a sharp, grounding reality in the fog of his humiliation. He kept his hand below the table, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs, for a different reason. The waiter, whose name tag read Clara, gave him a brief, almost imperceptible nod before turning and gliding away, her face a perfect mask of professional service. Isabella was laughing now, a brittle, triumphant sound. "Oh, look at his face, Marco. I think I finally rendered him speechless. It's a new record." But Leo was no longer listening. The world had narrowed to the small, secret thing in his hand, a mystery, a lifeline, a single, unexpected act of kindness in a sea of cruelty. He didn't know what it was, but as he sat there, stripped bare by his wife's brutal assessment, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a decade. Curiosity. And beneath it, the faintest ember of hope. The rest of the dinner was a blur. Leo went through the motions, his mind miles away. He excused himself to the restroom, his legs unsteady. Inside the sterile, marble-clad silence, he leaned against the counter, took a deep breath, and unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat, elegant. It wasn't a long message. It simply said, "Your grandfather, Antonio, was a dear friend of my father, the owner of this restaurant. He spoke of you with immense pride. Please, do not let them define you. My father asks that you call him." Below it was a name, Silvio, and a private phone number. Leo stared at the words, his mind struggling to connect the dots. His grandfather, Antonio. He had passed away almost a year ago. He had been a simple man, a gardener who had worked for wealthy families his entire life, including Isabella's. He was quiet, weathered, with hands like gnarled roots. Leo had loved him dearly, but like everyone else, he had seen him as just that, a humble, hard-working man of the earth. Pride. His grandfather had been proud of him. The thought was a balm on the raw wound of Isabella's words. Antonio had never approved of Isabella. He had been polite, always, but Leo had seen the sadness in the old man's eyes at the wedding, a silent understanding of what his grandson was sacrificing. Why would Silvio, the owner of one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, want to speak with him? And what did it have to do with his grandfather, the gardener? The questions swirled, displacing the shame and pain with a rising tide of intrigue. He carefully folded the note and tucked it deep into his pocket. It felt warm against his skin, a secret shield. When he returned to the table, something inside him had shifted. The sting of Isabella's words remained, but they no longer defined the space he occupied. He had a secret now, a small, sturdy anchor in the storm of her disdain. "Took you long enough," Isabella snapped, not looking up from her dessert menu. "Decided to rejoin the living, have we?" Leo looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in years. He saw the deep, unquenchable insecurity beneath the bravado. He saw the fear that drove her cruelty, the fear that she was not enough, that her status was fragile, that she needed to diminish him to feel large. And for the first time, he didn't feel hurt. He felt a profound, chilling sense of pity. "Yes," he said, his voice even and calm. "I have." The drive home was silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the oppressive quiet of Leo's submission. It was the charged silence of his contemplation. Isabella was on her phone, tapping out self-congratulatory messages to her business contacts. She was on top of the world. Leo's hand rested on his thigh, his fingers tracing the outline of the folded note in his pocket. He was at the bottom, a man who was nothing. But the bottom is a solid place to stand. From there, the only way to go is up. And he had a phone call to make. The history of their marriage was a long, slow erosion of his soul. Leo remembered their early days, the whirlwind romance that had swept him off his feet. Isabella had been drawn to what she called his authenticity. She loved that he worked with his hands, that he was grounded and real, a stark contrast to the slick, sycophantic men in her social circle. She would visit his garage perched on a stool in her expensive clothes, watching him work with a fascinated smile, but the fascination curdled into contempt once the novelty wore off. After they were married, his authenticity became a liability. His friends, fellow mechanics and tradesmen were deemed too coarse for her dinner parties. His simple pleasures, a beer after work, a weekend spent tinkering with a classic car, were seen as common and unambitious. "You could be so much more, Leo," she would say, her voice laced with disappointment. "You have potential. You just need to apply yourself to the right things." The right things were always her things. Her social events, her business connections, her relentless climb up the ladder of status and wealth. The sale of his garage was the first major fracture. He fought it, argued that it was his identity, his passion. "A hobby, Leo, it's a hobby," she had insisted, her tone leaving no room for debate. "A grown man doesn't play with cars for a living. I'm offering you a real career at Valenti Enterprises, a chance to be a part of something important. My father agrees." Her father, a man long tired of the corporate world, had been only too happy to let Isabella take the reins. He saw her ambition as a virtue and Leo's reluctance as a weakness. Pressured from all sides and still desperately in love with the woman he thought he knew, Leo had relented. It was the biggest mistake of his life. The job was a sham. He was given the title of Director of Logistic, but his duties were menial. He was a glorified office manager, tasked with ordering supplies and coordinating maintenance schedules, tasks far below his capabilities, but designed to keep him busy and out of the way of the real decision-making. Isabella and her brother Marco, who served as the chief financial officer, formed an impenetrable duo. They treated the company as their personal kingdom. Marco, who lacked Isabella's sharp intellect but shared all of her arrogance, was the perfect enabler. He admired his sister's ruthlessness and happily benefited from it. Family dinners became excruciating tribunals where Leo's perceived failings were dissected. He didn't dress well enough. He didn't network effectively. He was too quiet, too passive. His own family, simple, working-class people, were never invited to their sprawling mansion. Isabella had met them once early on and had dismissed them with a wave of her hand as perfectly nice, but not our kind of people. Leo's grandfather, Antonio, had been the only one who saw through the facade from the beginning. During his weekly visits to tend the magnificent gardens of their estate, a job he insisted on keeping even in his old age, he would find moments to speak with Leo alone. "She has a hungry heart, my boy," Antonio had said once, pruning a rosebush with his steady, calloused hands. "Be careful it does not devour yours." Leo had dismissed it as the overprotective worry of an old man who didn't understand their world. Now, the memory of his grandfather's words echoed with the clear, painful ring of truth. Antonio had seen it all. He had worked for the Valenti family for over 50 years, tending their gardens, a silent observer of their lives. He knew their secrets, their vanities, their fragile foundations. The day after the disastrous dinner, Leo waited until Isabella and Marco had left for the office, their laughter echoing in the marble foyer as they discussed the previous night's triumph. The house felt vast and empty. Leo stood in the kitchen, the folded note on the granite countertop. He stared at the phone number, his heart a frantic drum. This was a step into the unknown. For 10 years he had lived in a state of suspended animation, his life dictated by Isabella's whims. To make this call was to act for himself, to reclaim a piece of his own agency. The fear was immense. What if it was a prank, a misunderstanding? What if it led to nothing, leaving him even more hopeless than before? But the memory of Isabella's voice, sharp and dismissive, saying, "You're nothing without me," was the only motivation he needed. He picked up his phone and dialed the number. An older man's voice, warm and rich, answered on the second ring. "Silvio!" "Mr. Silvio, my name is Leo. I was at your restaurant last night. Your daughter, but she gave me a note." Leo's voice was hesitant, unsteady. "Ah, Leonardo, I have been expecting your call," Silvio said, his tone instantly putting Leo at ease. "My Clara has a good heart and good eyes. She saw what was happening. I am so sorry you were treated that way in my establishment." It's not your fault," Leo stammered. "No, but I knew your grandfather for 40 years, son. Antonio was more than my friend. He was my mentor in many ways, a wiser, more honorable man I have never met. He would be heartbroken to see you diminished. He was so incredibly proud of you, you know. He always told me, 'My Leo has a good heart and clever hands. He will find his way.'" Tears pricked Leo's eyes. To hear this, a day after being told he was worthless, was like water in a desert. "He asked me to do something. Should the need ever arise," Silvio continued, his voice becoming more serious. "He set certain things in motion a long time ago. He foresaw possibilities. He gave me a name and a number for you, a lawyer, Mr. Alistair. Antonio told me, if my Leo is ever truly in a corner, have him call this man." "A lawyer?" Leo's mind raced. His grandfather had been a gardener. What possible use could he have for a high-powered lawyer? "I don't understand," Leo said. "My grandfather, and he didn't have any money. His final expenses were paid from his small savings account." Silvio chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Antonio was the most humble man I ever knew. He was also the most brilliant. What people saw was a man with dirt under his fingernails. What I saw was a king who preferred to live among the flowers. Please, Leo, call Mr. Alistair. Your grandfather wanted you to have the keys to your own life. I believe this man holds them." Silvio gave him the number, and after a few more minutes of conversation, they hung up. Leo sat in the silent kitchen, the two phone numbers, Silvio's and now Alistair's, representing a doorway he never knew existed. His grandfather, the quiet gardener, had left him not a will, but a plan, a contingency. The full weight of it began to settle on him. For years, Antonio had watched him, had seen the life he was living, and had quietly prepared a way out. It was a staggering act of love and foresight. He immediately called the second number. A crisp, professional receptionist answered. "Alistair, Finch and Associates?" "Hello, my name is Leo. I was told to call Mr. Alistair," he said, feeling out of his depth. "One moment, please." There was a brief pause, then a new voice came on the line. It was smooth, calm, and radiated an unnerving intelligence. "Mr. Alistair speaking." "Mr. Alistair, my name is Leo Rossi. I was given your number by Silvio, the owner of La Lanterna. He said my grandfather, Antonio Rossi, had made some arrangements with you." There was a significant silence on the other end of the line. Leo could hear the faint rustle of papers. "Antonio Rossi," Alistair said, his voice imbued with a newfound respect. "Of course. We have been waiting for your call for some time, Mr. Rossi. I was your grandfather's legal counsel for over 30 years. I am, in fact, the executor of his actual estate." "His estate?" Leo was bewildered. "But there was nothing. A few $1,000s. Alistair cut him off gently. "What you saw was his personal checking account, purposefully kept modest. His estate is considerably more complex. Your grandfather was a man of remarkable prudence and secrecy. Could you perhaps come to my office, Mr. Rossi? This is not a conversation for the telephone. Tomorrow at 10. Leo's world was tilting on its axis. He agreed, his voice a hoarse whisper. He spent the rest of the day in a daze. When Isabella came home, she was still riding the high of her corporate victory and her verbal conquest of the night before. She barely noticed his distracted state. "I'm dissolving your department, by the way," she announced casually, as she poured herself a glass of wine. "Logistics can be outsourced for a fraction of your salary. Don't worry," she added with a magnanimous air. "I'll find some other little projects to keep you occupied. We can't have you getting bored." A week ago, those words would have crushed him. Now they were like stones skipping across the surface of a deep, still lake. He simply nodded, a strange calm settling over him. He was no longer a participant in her drama. He was an observer waiting for the curtain to rise on a new act. "That's good," he said, his voice devoid of the emotion she expected. "Whatever you think is best, Isabella." She frowned, thrown off by his placid response. She had expected pleading or anger, something to feed her sense of power. His quiet acceptance was disconcerting. She shrugged it off, attributing it to his final, complete defeat. She had no idea that it was the exact opposite. It was the calm before the storm. The offices of Alistair, Finch and Associates were located in the heart of the financial district, in a skyscraper that tore at the clouds. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass. Leo, in his best simple suit, one Isabella had bought him and called passable, felt like an impostor. He was led into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city. A man in his late 60s with sharp grey eyes and an impeccably tailored suit rose from behind a massive mahogany desk. It was Mr. Alistair. "Mr. Rossi, it is an honour to finally meet you," Alistair said, shaking his hand firmly. "Your grandfather was one of my most esteemed clients, and one of my most interesting." Alistair gestured for him to sit. On the desk between them was a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "Your grandfather was a genius," Alistair began, his voice low and serious. "People saw a gardener. He was, in fact, one of the most astute investors I have ever known. He had one simple philosophy: God makes the land, but he isn't making any more of it. Leo listened, spellbound, as the lawyer explained. Starting in the 1960s with his meager salary, Antonio had begun buying land. Small, forgotten parcels on the outskirts of the city that no one wanted. He used different names, set up simple trusts, and lived as frugally as a monk, pouring every spare penny into his acquisitions. Over the decades, the city grew out to meet his properties, Alistair said, a note of awe in his voice. The forgotten fields became industrial parks. The scrubland became suburban developments. He never sold. He leased, long-term, 99-year leases. Alistair opened the portfolio. It was filled with maps, deeds, and corporate ownership charts so complex they made Leo's head spin. He structured everything through a series of anonymous holding companies and offshore trusts, all leading to a single master trust, a trust of which you, Leonardo Rossi, became the sole beneficiary upon his death. The lawyer paused, letting the weight of the information sink in. He wanted you to live your own life, to make your own way. He didn't want the weight of this to shape you. But he also created a fail-safe. He left instructions with me and a few other trusted confidants like Silvio. If it ever became clear that you were in a position of extreme distress, we were to make you aware of the tools at your disposal. Tools? Leo whispered, his throat dry. Alistair leaned forward. Leo, your grandfather didn't just own random plots of land. He was strategic. He owned, for example, the land under the Blackwood Industrial Park. The entire park. Leo's blood ran cold. The Blackwood Industrial Park was the crown jewel of Valenti Enterprises. It was the location of their primary manufacturing plants and distribution centers. Not just that, Alistair continued, turning a page. He owned the land under the building we are sitting in right now. He owned the land under Silvio's restaurant. He owned a significant portion of the downtown commercial district. The lawyer slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a summary of assets. Leo's eyes scanned the numbers, but his brain refused to process them. The figures were astronomical, strings of zeros that seemed more like a fantasy than an accounting. The estimated net worth was in the billions, not millions, billions. Leo felt a wave of vertigo. He gripped the arms of the chair to steady himself. This was impossible. His grandfather? The man who wore patched trousers and brought him vegetables from his garden? And now for the most poetic piece of his strategy, Alistair said, a slight smile touching his lips. He pointed to a specific deed on the map. 25 years ago, the Valenti family was on the verge of bankruptcy. They needed to expand but had no capital. An anonymous benefactor offered them a deal, a 99-year lease on a huge tract of prime industrial land for an astonishingly low price. That deal saved their company. It was the foundation upon which Isabella built her entire empire. Leo looked at the lawyer, the terrible, beautiful truth dawning on him. It was him, Leo breathed. My grandfather. Yes, Alistair confirmed. Antonio Rossi owns the very ground beneath Valenti Enterprises, and now you do. The irony was so profound, so devastatingly perfect, that Leo almost laughed. Isabella, in her towering arrogance, had built her castle on his land. She mocked him for being nothing, while her entire world was unknowingly propped up by the legacy of the grandfather she had dismissed as a lowly servant. The lease agreement, Alistair said, tapping a thick document, was drafted by your grandfather himself with my assistance. It is a work of art. It contains numerous clauses, including a morality clause tied to the treatment of family members and a clause allowing for an immediate review and renegotiation of terms upon the death of the original lessor, him, at the discretion of the new lessor, you. Leo stared at the documents, at the maps, at the dizzying numbers. The man who had been called nothing just 2 nights ago owned the stage on which his tormentors performed their lives. He had the power not just to walk away, but to dismantle their entire world. What do I do?" Leo asked, his voice shaking with the enormity of it all. Alistair's expression became grim, determined. "That, Mr. Rossi, is entirely up to you. You can continue to lease them the land. You can raise the lease to current market value, which would effectively bankrupt them within a quarter, or you can find them in breach of any number of clauses and terminate the lease altogether, evicting them from the property their company has occupied for 25 years. The lawyer leaned back. "Your grandfather gave you a sword, Leo. Whether you choose to draw it is your decision." Leo sat in silence for a long time, the city sprawling beneath him. He thought of the 10 years of quiet humiliation. He thought of his sold garage, his lost identity. He thought of every condescending remark, every dismissive gesture. He thought of Marco's snickering and Isabella's cold, cruel eyes. And he thought of her final, definitive statement. "You're nothing without me." A cold, hard clarity settled over him. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about balance. The scales had been tipped for far too long. He looked up and missed her. Alistair saw the shift in his eyes. The victim was gone. The man who sat before him now was someone else entirely. "Mr. Alistair," Leo said, his voice steady and clear, imbued with a newfound authority. "Let's talk about termination." The planning phase was meticulous, a series of strategic meetings in Alistair's soundproof conference room. Leo, who had once felt lost in the world of corporate finance, now found himself absorbing the information with a frightening intensity. It was as if a dormant part of his brain, a part that understood complex systems just like he understood engines, had roared to life. "The first step is to establish your legal authority as the new head of the trusts," Alistair explained, pointing to a flowchart on a large screen. "We have all the documentation. It's a matter of filing the paperwork. Once that is done, you are, for all legal purposes, the anonymous landlord they have been dealing with for decades." Leo nodded, his focus absolute. "And they won't know it's me." "Not a clue," Alistair confirmed. "The trusts are designed for maximum anonymity. All communications will come from my office, as they always have. They will assume it is business as usual, a change in management for the holding company." The plan was multi-pronged, designed to be a cascade of devastating blows. It wasn't just about the land under Valenti Enterprises. Antonio's portfolio was vast and, as they discovered, deeply intertwined with Isabella and Marco's financial lives in ways they could never have imagined. "This is fascinating," Alistair mused, pointing to another file. "It seems your brother-in-law, Marco, fancies himself a property developer on the side. He has a line of credit with Sterling Bank, secured against his future Valenti earnings to fund his little projects." "And?" Leo asked. "And your grandfather's trust happens to be the single largest shareholder in Sterling Bank's parent company," Alistair said with a predatory grin. "You essentially own his debt. You can recall his line of credit at any time, for any reason." The beautiful, cruel symmetry of it all was breathtaking. Marco, who had laughed at Leo's powerlessness, was financially beholden to him. "And Isabella," Alistair continued, "is obsessed with social standing. Her name is on the board of every major charity and cultural institution in the city. The museum, the opera, the symphony." He brought up another list. "Your grandfather, through various charitable foundations that now fall under your control, is the principal benefactor for almost all of them. His name was never attached. He was always the anonymous angel donor. But you hold the purse strings. You can, with a single phone call, halt all funding and recommend a review of the board members. The plan was surgical. It wasn't a clumsy, angry outburst. It was a systematic dismantling of a house of cards, using their own arrogance and overreach as the primary weapon. The first domino was the main lease for the Blackwood Industrial Park. Alastair drafted a formal letter from the landlord citing several minor, long-overlooked compliance issues Leo knew existed from his time in his pointless logistics job. The letter informed Valenti Enterprises that due to these breaches, the landlord was exercising their right to a full-scale audit and a formal review of the lease terms. "This will be the first shot across the bow," Alastair explained. "It will sow panic. They will see it as a shakedown, an attempt by a new owner to squeeze more money out of them. They will react with arrogance, not fear. They will try to bully us." "Let them," Leo said, a cold fire in his eyes. While Alastair prepared the legal assault, Leo played his part. He went to the Valenti office every day, a ghost in the machine. He packed up his small desk, as Isabella had instructed, feigning a quiet, defeated sadness. "Oh, Leo, don't look so glum," she said, walking past his cubicle without stopping. "It's for the best. Now you'll have more time to, I don't know, read a book or something." He just looked up at her and nodded. The dramatic irony was so thick he could taste it. He was a man packing a cardboard box, and yet he held the fate of the entire building, and the woman who mocked him, in the palm of his hand. The day the first letter arrived, Leo was at home. Isabella called him, her voice tight with fury. "Some vulture has bought the land our facilities are on," she spat. "They're trying to extort us, sending letters about audits and lease reviews. The nerve!" Leo listened, making sympathetic noises. "Oh no, that sounds terrible. Well, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to crush them," she snarled. "Marco is already having our legal team draft a response that will put these nobodies in their place. They have no idea who they're dealing with." "Oh, I think they do," Leo thought to himself. The next day, the second domino fell. Marco, in the middle of a meeting, received an urgent call from Sterling Bank. His multi-million-dollar line of credit had been frozen, effective immediately, pending a full review of his financial situation. His side projects, leveraged to the hilt, were instantly thrown into jeopardy. Leo watched the fallout from a distance. He heard the panicked phone calls, the shouting matches between Isabella and Marco behind closed office doors. They were blindsided, confused. They saw these as separate, unrelated crises, bad luck piling up all at once. They couldn't see the invisible hand coordinating their demise. Isabella's arrogance began to crack, replaced by a frantic, paranoid energy. She became obsessed, working late into the night, trying to fight battles on two fronts. She grew short-tempered and distracted, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. Leo, meanwhile, maintained his facade of the beaten, unemployed husband. He made her dinner. He asked if there was anything he could do to help. His gentle solicitude infuriated her. "What could you possibly do, Leo?" she snapped one evening, throwing a file onto the dining table. "Do you understand leveraged finance? Do you know how to negotiate with corporate raiders? No, just stay out of my way." "Of course, dear," he said softly, a quiet, knowing smile on his face as he turned away. The third domino was the social one. One by one, Isabella received calls from the chairpersons of the city's most prestigious boards. The museum, the opera. The story was the same. Their primary anonymous benefactor had paused all donations and requested a review of the board's governance and membership, citing concerns about fiscal responsibility and personal ethics. Her name, once a golden ticket, was now a liability. She was politely asked to step down from her positions pending the review. The public humiliation was immense. The society pages, which had once fawned over her, were now buzzing with rumors. Her social standing, the thing she valued above all else, was evaporating overnight. This blow hit her harder than the financial ones. She was adrift, cut off from the sources of her power and prestige. The empire she had built was crumbling, and she had no idea who was attacking her or why. The cascade effect was devastating. With Marco's credit frozen, his development projects collapsed, triggering lawsuits from his partners. The audit of Valenti Enterprises, led by Alistair's forensic accountants, unearthed years of creative accounting and Marco's habit of running personal expenses through the company, breaches of the lease agreement so severe they were undeniable. Isabella and Marco were trapped in a burning building, with every exit being sealed off one by one. Their lawyers were powerless, met at every turn by the iron wall of Alistair's firm and the unassailable legal standing of the trust. Leo watched it all, a silent observer of his own meticulously crafted plan. He saw the panic in their eyes, the desperation, and he felt nothing, no pity, no remorse, just the cold, clean satisfaction of a long overdue equation finally being balanced. The final act was approaching. Alistair had prepared the ultimate weapon, the eviction notice. Valenti Enterprises was in such clear violation of their lease that they could be legally ordered to vacate the premises in 30 days. It would be the death blow to the company. "It's time," Alistair said, during their final meeting. "We've presented them with a final offer, a meeting to discuss the situation. They believe they are coming to negotiate with the new owner. They have no idea they will be meeting with you." The meeting was set. The location was chosen by Leo himself, a stroke of poetic genius. La Lanterna, the restaurant where it had all begun. He had Alistair book the private dining room, the very room that overlooked the table where he had been so thoroughly humiliated. The night of the confrontation, Leo dressed carefully. He didn't wear an expensive new suit. He wore the same simple, passable suit he had worn to Alistair's office. He wanted them to see the same man they had always seen. The illusion had to hold until the very last moment. He arrived early and sat with Alistair in the private room, looking down at the main dining floor. He saw Clara, the waiter, moving gracefully between tables. She caught his eye and gave him a small, encouraging smile. He nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the woman who had unknowingly started it all. Then he saw them arrive, Isabella and Marco. They looked haggard, stressed. Isabella had a forced, defiant look on her face, while Marco just looked pale and terrified. They were led up the stairs to the private room. The door opened. Isabella and Marco stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room for the powerful tycoon they expected to meet. They saw Alistair, whom they recognized from legal letters, and then their eyes fell on Leo, sitting calmly at the head of the table. Isabella froze, a look of pure confusion on her face. "Leo, what on earth are you doing here? This is a private business meeting. Go home." Marco looked equally bewildered. "Get out of here, Leo. This is way above your pay grade." Leo didn't move. He simply gestured to the empty chairs opposite him. "Please, sit down. You wanted to meet the owner."
"Here I am." Isabella let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. This isn't the time for your pathetic games. Mr. Alistair, where is your client?" Alistair smiled thinly. "You're looking at him." The reality of the situation failed to penetrate their wall of arrogance. They stared, uncomprehending. "What is this?" Marco stammered. "Some kind of joke?" Leo finally spoke, his voice calm and measured, carrying the weight of all the years of silence. "No joke, Marco. For 10 years, you and your sister have treated me like a piece of furniture, a nuisance, an idiot. You spent all that time looking down on me, but you never once thought to look down at the ground you were standing on." He let the words hang in the air. He could see the first glimmer of dawning horror in Isabella's eyes. "The land," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Blackwood property, that's you?" "That's me," Leo confirmed. "Well, more accurately, it was my grandfather, Antonio Rossi."
"The man you both dismissed as your gardener. He was a very wise man. He bought the land your entire company is built on and leased it to your family when they were about to go bankrupt. And when he passed away, he left it all to me." The colour drained from Isabella's face. She sank into a chair, her body suddenly limp. Marco remained standing, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "But how?" Isabella stammered. "The banks, the boards, everything." "All connected," Leo said, his voice cold as ice. "My grandfather was a far more influential man than you ever imagined. He built a secret empire and you, in your blindness, never saw it. You thought wealth was about designer clothes and fancy dinners. He knew true wealth was the earth beneath your feet." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You told me, right here in this restaurant, that I was nothing without you. The truth is, Isabella, your company, your social standing, your entire world, it's nothing without me." He used her own words against her, and they struck with the force of a physical blow. She flinched, as if he had slapped her. "You called Marco's line of credit," she breathed, the pieces finally clicking into place. "You had me removed from the boards." "Those were consequences," Leo said flatly. "Consequences of the clauses my grandfather put in place. Morality clauses about the treatment of family. Financial clauses that Marco, in his greed, violated 100 times over. You did this to yourselves. I just decided to enforce the contract." Marco finally found his voice, a pathetic, squeaking thing. "You can't do this. We'll sue you. We'll fight this." Alistair spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. "Fight us with what, Mr. Valenti? Your company is insolvent. Your credit is gone. We have documented proof of embezzlement and fraud."
"A court battle would not only be unwinnable, it would likely end with criminal charges for you both." The finality of Alistair's statement crushed Marco's pathetic defiance. He collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. But Isabella was not done. Her shock morphed into a desperate, furious rage. She rose to her feet, her eyes blazing with a lifetime of entitled fury. "You snake!" she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly. "You pathetic little man. You sat there in my house, eating my food, letting me take care of you, all while you plotted this." "Your house?" Leo countered, his voice dangerously quiet. "Let's talk about the house, Isabella. My grandfather's portfolio was diverse. He also invested in mortgages, including the mortgage on your house, which, I'm afraid, is now in default. You have 30 days. This was the final unthinkable blow. Her home, the symbol of her success, even that was his. Isabella let out a sound that was half scream, half sob.
She lunged across the table, her hands reaching for him, her face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. "I will destroy you!" Alistair was on his feet in an instant, blocking her path. "I would not do that if I were you, madam." Isabella broke down completely. The elegant, powerful matriarch was gone, replaced by a screaming, crying mess. She railed against Leo, against her brother, against the world. It was a total public breakdown, the spectacular implosion of a dying star. Leo simply watched her, his face impassive. He felt no triumph, no joy, only a vast, empty sense of closure. The debt had been paid, the balance was restored. He stood up, adjusted the lapels of his simple suit, and looked at the woman who had been his wife. The eviction notice for Valenti Enterprises will be delivered tomorrow morning, he said calmly. You have 30 days to vacate my property. Goodbye, Isabella. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving her shrieking and sobbing in the ruins of her life. He didn't look back. As he walked down the stairs, he passed Silvio, the owner, who simply placed a hand on his shoulder and nodded, a look of profound respect in his eyes. The cycle was complete. The aftermath was swift and brutal for the Valentis. The eviction notice was the final nail in the coffin for their company. With no facilities and no capital, Valenti Enterprises declared bankruptcy within the week. The news of their collapse, coupled with the emerging details of Marco's financial misdeeds, made them pariahs. Marco was indicted on charges of fraud and embezzlement. Faced with overwhelming evidence compiled by Alistair's team, he took a plea deal and was sentenced to several years in a low-security prison, his life of undeserved luxury exchanged for a world of rigid routine and regret. Isabella lost everything: the company, the house, the social standing. She was forced to sell her jewelry and clothes to pay for lawyers. The friends who had once flocked to her parties now crossed the street to avoid her. She ended up living in a small, nondescript apartment, a ghost of her former self, haunted by the echoes of a life she had taken for granted and a husband she had so fatally underestimated. Leo, however, did not revel in their downfall. With his newfound power, he chose not to become the thing he had fought against. He chose compassion. His first act was to establish a fund for the former employees of Valenti Enterprises, ensuring they all received generous severance packages and assistance in finding new jobs. He worked with Silvio to set up a training program for restaurant workers, offering scholarships and opportunities for advancement, funded by a foundation he named after his grandfather, Antonio. He wanted to use his wealth to empower the hard-working, often invisible people his grandfather had so respected. He sold the monstrous mansion he had shared with Isabella and moved into a comfortable but modest home. The billions in the trust remained largely untouched, managed by Alistair, growing quietly. Leo had no interest in yachts or private jets. His grandfather had taught him that true wealth wasn't in what you owned, but in the freedom you possessed. One evening, months later, he returned to La Lanterna, not for a power meeting, but for a quiet dinner, alone. He was seated at a small, discreet table. Clara was his server. "It's good to see you, Leo," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "You look lighter?" "I feel lighter," he admitted. He had spent the last few months rediscovering himself, the man he was before Isabella. He had even set up a small private workshop where he could once again tinker with old engines, finding solace in the familiar scent of oil and the logic of machinery. They talked for a long time that evening after the restaurant had quieted down. He learned about her dreams of opening her own small bistro one day. He saw in her the same quiet strength and integrity he had admired in his grandfather and in her father, Silvio. There was an honesty about her that felt like coming home. That dinner was the first of many. A new, gentle story began to write itself, one built not on power dynamics and social climbing, but on mutual respect and shared values. It was a quiet happiness, the kind he had once thought was lost to him forever. Leo's victory was not in the destruction of Isabella, but in the reconstruction of himself. He had been stripped of everything, told he was nothing, only to discover he held everything. He learned that true power wasn't about controlling others, but about controlling oneself. It wasn't about having the loudest voice in the room, but about having the strength to speak your truth when it mattered most. In the end, he was not the sum of Isabella's cruel words. He was the legacy of a humble gardener who knew the value of the earth, the power of patience, and the quiet dignity of a well-lived life. and that was a fortune no amount of money could ever buy. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the freedom to be who you truly are, a lesson he now understood in his very soul. He had finally found his way